Joe, that's good with the 30 minutes session. I don't know which session that's gonna be. I'm gonna need at least 45. Like, guys, I brought you so much that I can't wait to show you. So to set quick expectations, thank you, ladies, for the intro. But I also want to introduce myself super quickly from a different point of view that I think it's kind of relevant to our presentation today. And then, guys, I will clarify quickly what do I mean by UX strategy, because this term sometimes gets used in a different context than what I mean. So we will make sure we are on the same page what UX strategy we are talking about. Then we are gonna look at the different therapies so that I can show you which therapy or what exactly as therapy am I comparing to. We'll briefly touch on the similarities in the processes because the main part, and I can't wait to get to that, guys. That's what I brought you and can't wait to show you. I brought you 2 case studies from my experience with clients, which I think will make it really tangible for our brains. Why is UX strategy actually business therapy, in my point of view? So hello, everybody. I know you know me under Martina Mitz, but my actual name is Martina Ivanova Mitsieva-Velia. Good luck spelling, pronouncing it correctly. We have a joke in Bulgarian. The last one should close the door. It's like so long that a few people are coming in. But because, guys, I'm truly user-centered and I wouldn't torture you to even try to pronounce my entire name correctly, I go under the friendly, user-friendly Martina Mitz, where you can find me everywhere online where I have something. You'll be able to find me under that alias. And my story started already last century, so much to old faces. Yes, I'm that old. End of the 90s, guys, it was, if you remember, quite, the ones of you who remember, it was quite trendy to be a DJ or a web designer. And I was like, I want to have my own website. So I moved to Germany, end of the 90s. And next to learning German, which I tell you is a huge challenge, the ones of you who haven't gone through that, it's a huge challenge. In the remaining time, I was like, okay, let me try and see how web pages are built, because we were just past the era of hyperlinks, and that was considered web design. But we were slowly starting to work with tables and like aligning images for the ones of you who remember. Then, guys, the 1st of January 2001, I moved to Berlin. I was like 19, about 20, yeah, and completely broke. So I needed to start selling what I was able to do. If I didn't want to clean and like give flyers on the streets, right, that was the only thing I could do. But selling websites is very different than making websites. Imagine me with 18, 19, 20 with pink hair. My German was not good at all. Going to a business owner and saying, here, I've got something for you, give me your money. It was more nervousness than now before the talk, to be honest with you. So I've built for myself kind of a process, which I call the confidence process. So I would sit down, it was before Google. So I would use mama.com, back then the mother of all search engines, and I would type physical addresses close to my address in Berlin. Look, what businesses do even have online representations? And back then it was just text and like these tables, as I said, right? Very clear, or like some GIFs jumping over the text, fishes and bubbles and snow effects, and yeah, very bad times for visual design back then, and usability and readability. But I would research what businesses are around me. I would try to understand what they're trying to convey and to whom, who is actually their target group. Then create a small demo of how I imagine their design and the website and the structure, the information and all of that. So digest all these text and had kind of like the key learnings there, the key messages, the key value. And then, guys, before I call a business owner and tell them, here I'm someone, I have something to sell you, but my German is still broken and I look like not the usual business partner, I would actually call all my friends, or back then I was married, my husband's parents' friends, and ask them to call their friends, and I would put it in front of them. Not because I was that much the researcher back then, to be honest with you, but because I needed the confidence for a few people to tell me, yeah, it works, it's good, oh my gosh, it looks beautiful. And that would give me the rationale to overcome that shyness and kind of really not feeling out of comfort zone and feeling out of place, and to actually start going to businesses and saying, I know you guys have a website, but here is what I have for you as a suggestion. Only 1-2 menu points will work just as a demonstration, and here is what people say about it. And I saw that started working, and that, guys, helped me pretty much finance my life, my study in Berlin. I finished the latter in not the life, obviously, in 2007, and that was before bachelor and master. So I studied full 5.5 years, where the last 2.5 years we specialized in one of the directions in psychology. And as Bea mentioned, I specialized in clinical psychology. And guess what, guys? It didn't even take me a year to work as a clinical psychologist, and I completely burned out. I can't I couldn't tell you how much is 1 + 1. It was that bad. So my mom actually reminded me of my passion. I came back to web design, which now was coding, wasn't my thing, but there was this UX design. And fast forward 10 years, guys, I actually found my place as a psychologist, because back then all the UXers were visual designers and graphic designers, and I was the only psychologist. So I was kind of like the crazy girl around there. So it really, you see, it's like in 10-year cycles that I not reimagine, but kind of reposition or find to myself. I would just easily put it like that. And guess what, guys? Since 2018, I'm a consultant. I work with clients, not for companies anymore, but with clients, right? And the process hasn't changed much. Just now, it's not for my confidence, it's for their confidence. Avoiding risk, knowing they do the right investment. It's the same process. We research, we do some concept demonstration so that we can put it in front of people and then test if we're on the right path. You know that well enough. Now, coming to UX strategy, I told you I'd like to first clarify what I'm talking about, because I've heard the term used in different ways. And guys, if we just look at UX, come on, it's so many terms that we like to confuse our colleagues, right? It's like, yeah, you know all this. Even the double diamond is the same process, right? I love this graphic because it puts it so well visually what we actually go through, and I call it simply, it's scientific problem solving. Because first we go through gathering all this different information, right? And of course, inevitably, it's a mess to bring all this data and find the common things, the differences, really the connections between these data points. Always. If you don't feel overwhelmed and lost in the middle of research, you don't do it, right? You need more data. And then we kind of, and here, guys, design as problem solving and not as art, right? Then once we have gathered that data and kind of have a common understanding, a fundament of information that we can start from, then we go into solution mode. We build a concept, we build out the idea, right? We develop it, and then we run maybe an optimization cycle or two before we get to the actual visual design, development, and all the delivery, which then, if we do it the right way, should go quite smoothly, right? Because by that time, you already know if you're on the right path and what exactly you need. So when I say UX strategy, I mean, guys, this creating of this fundament, giving the information that people need to take informed decisions, business people really to go informed from users' point of view, take the decisions and not, oh, we can do that, or we just now have that feature, why not release it, right? Sounds familiar. What I don't mean, guys, is the implementation or the finding of solutions itself. And I call that first part, this mess of information, I actually call it your UX psychology. I hope that will become clear why I do that in a bit. Also, a lot of colleagues use the term UX strategy as the strategy for the UX team. This is not what I mean today. I mean really this bringing all different departments, different stakeholders, even partners, business partners, on the same understanding, the same mental model, if you wish, pretty much the same understanding of what we are talking about. Who are we doing something for, right? Now, the more interesting part, what therapy am I talking about? And for that, guys, we need to take a step back actually and first clarify what is psychology, because when you start throwing that term, people are like, Martina, don't send me to a psychiatrist. And I'm like, guys, no, that's a colleague. It's not the same. Or like, stop. You need to go to a psychotherapy, not even knowing what it is. Or when they say, stop psychoanalyzing me. And I'm like, I'm not even, I haven't even started, like I'm not qualified for. So there is a big mess always with all these psycho terms. Let me shed in some light here, guys. The psychiatrist, I'm not sure on which side you see it, but the psychiatrist is a person who works with all the organs, with our physiology, right? So these are tangible processes like heartbeats or electrical signals that go through that you can actually measure. So pretty much tangible. The psychologist, on the other hand, if at all interested, is only interested in the brain and how it affects the rest of the body. So inevitably here we have a lot of not so tangible processes that you have to kind of grasp between the lines or access indirectly. Yeah. And that is, guys, because they have quite different interests. They study different things, right? The psychiatrist studies medicine, the whole evolution of species, how they develop, how different substances work on the different organs, so really physiology. Whereas on the other hand, as I mentioned, the psychologist studies all these like mushy, not so directly tangible processes, hence more interested in the development of an individual. Not all the species, but rather an individual, or the individual in communication with others, in interaction with others. And as I mentioned, just some of us are such freaks like me in brains. Most of the psychologists even forget what the parts of the brain are and they don't need them, to be honest. That's rather the psychiatrists who know them more. And hence, guys, the psychiatrist is the guy who gives you the drugs, right? Because he's a doctor or she. The psychotherapist, on the other hand, when they treat you, they'll talk to you, they'll make you fill out surveys to kind of get that data between the lines from you. And the stereotype, if they put you on a couch, not always necessary, but guys, if they start asking you about your childhood, you've landed at a psychoanalyst's office, which is a sub-discipline of psychotherapy. And psychology itself, you see already, has kind of these two distinct fields, right? The one is this scientific, gathering information, creating understanding, kind of examining people, researching people and the implicit processes. Whereas the tradition is already the applied side, right? So the psychotherapist already applies this knowledge to be able to do something with it. And this is called, guys, the gathering of information is the empirical psychology. And obviously, the applying of this knowledge is the applied psychology. Does that remind you of something? The discovery, the solution mode. You see, we already go in that direction. Now, to come back to what therapy I'm actually talking about, guys, I'll give you a quick overview of the two main directions in psychology, in empirical psychology, which actually formed two different schools of applied psychology. Starting from the very famous behaviorists, right, who actually were kind of as an opposition to what was going in Europe the beginning of last century. Freud was very popular and strong with his theories in Europe, and the Americans said, no, guys, we are all physiologists. Most of them were psychiatrists and learned additionally psychology. And psychology wasn't even a recognized science back then, right? So they said, we are going to go the methods we know. So there is some stimuli from somewhere, if from inside, if from outside. There is something happening inside the human, but we will concentrate only on these outputs, on these tangible responses that are kind of on the conscious level, right? People can talk about, you can observe them, you can measure a lot of behaviors, right? The movement of my muscles and all of that, quite tangible. But then, middle of last century, Europe wasn't sleeping and was like, you know what, guys? Well, it actually started in the US again, but like Europe made it big, the cognitive revolution. It was like, wait, all of this that's happening here inside, this is not just some black box. These are mental processes as well. It's not just something happens and then there is a response, but these processes actually kind of lay the ground for what happens. So the behaviors that we see on the surface that we come to realize are actually symptoms of what happens inside us. And now to the therapies, guys. You know behavioral therapy, right? Super famous. Cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of trying to already breach this gap between conscious and subconscious. And I mentioned the psychoanalysis before because it's really kind of the one extreme of the spectrum. It really goes deep and only looks at these very, very early structures, mental structures from which all behaviors and thinking patterns and perception patterns and attitudes arise. So the behavioral one, right, very no-brainer, concentrates only on these tangible outputs as behaviors and how to modify them. The cognitive behavioral one looks at, breaches a bit that gap to the subconscious and looks at which mental structures lead to these behaviors. We need to work on the mental structures as well. And as I mentioned, psychoanalysts are like, forget your behaviors, forget what you're thinking now, it's all in the childhood. Yeah, it's a bit stereotypical, guys. Psychoanalysis develops as well. It's not that deep, but it goes really deep compared to all the others. Hence, it also takes quite long. And now guess what, guys? I think it was before last year, the German health insurance, if it recognizes a therapy, that means it's like a medicine. It must prove over 10 years that it's more effective than the current treatment methods on the market. And finally, psychotherapists and health people arrived at the systemic look at problems, right? So last century, it was like, you have a problem, we need to work on you, on your perception. Happily, that has changed, and it's like, no, wait, your environment, your network, support network, all of that plays a role. Every problem is kind of an ecosystem of factors, right? And this is the one therapy, guys, that I wanted to kind of not concentrate on it, but it's the way of thinking that I come from, right? It doesn't matter. I don't want to overwhelm you with different therapy methods, so I really picked the popular ones and to kind of show you the scale of different therapies. It really doesn't matter which one you go through. others than the psychoanalysis. It doesn't follow any structure pretty much, or a known structure, but all the other therapies have actually a process manual, if you wish. So a client, it's not called a patient, right? We are not medics. A client comes to you and says, I have a problem. First, mostly their problem is on the output level. It's not really, there is underlying problem. So you need to start examining them, understanding that problem. You gather all this information. At some point, you come to a conclusion, you analyze all this data, and you come to a conclusion, what the problem might be. Now here, we usually put a diagnosis, because this is the way how we communicate with other experts, be it the GP or the psychiatrist. Sometimes I'm not a psychotherapist. Psychotherapists need to collaborate with different experts, right? And the diagnosis, this number with a letter before, is actually the common language. The common understanding is just made so efficient that just a letter with a few numbers is enough for the other colleague to understand what's going on there, what's what we think there is. So you confirm it by a few other experts, and then you are good to go into the next step to educate the client what they actually have, not always what they thought, right? Then you suggest a solution, one treatment out of many paths there are, or many methods. And then your client starts trying out the treatment they can imagine, some process that they can imagine starting with, step by step. You as a therapist are there to always kind of mirror the process to your client, because when people were feeling very bad and then they start feeling better, they forget where they started from. So as a therapist, you need to show them actually the progress and show them the comparison of how it was and how now it is. And the main goal of a therapist, guys, is to make the client independent of the therapist, right? So a successful therapy is when the client can apply all these constructive methods to better themselves without you being in the picture. Does that sound familiar, peeps? Right? So we start with research, right? We consolidate the data. We don't put a diagnosis on it, but we consolidate the data so that we can talk to our colleagues and they understand, and we don't overwhelm them with all the data. So we align on the same common understanding of the people, the actors who have the problem, their context, all the variables that play a role there. And then we're good to go in solution mode. We start ideating different solutions, rating them. The ones with the potential, we prototype them, we test them, then we measure the success. And now here is the big difference. Most of our colleagues, and especially agencies that I know of, they're trying to make the client dependent from our expertise. Well, guys, I'm sorry, but I'm on a mission to make us all unemployed. Thank me later. It's not gonna happen while we are all alive, right? There are always UX issues everywhere, so I don't think it's gonna happen soon. But that's exactly what I call UX psychology, right? So I specialize really in that first stage, getting all this information, creating the connections, to then have that common fundament where together with other experts, you can't know it all, right? You need other heads with other points of view, different knowledge, and then I kind of lead them into this, creating the solutions, and I'm pretty much out. And if they can do it without me, that's a successful project for me. Yeah, not if they come back. And that's the part I couldn't wait to come to, actually, guys, because first example that I brought you today out of two was about behavioral change. And it was very interesting because a business owner, a very young guy, just coming out of an MBA, super top university, having had a grant for his great idea, won a contest, has founded a small startup of 4 people. And we met around 20th of February, 2021. Remember what was back then, guys? Corona started. So just 3 days after we met, it was kind of end of February, just 3 days later, it was worldwide lockdown. Yeah. And when we met, he was like, Martina, we have 2 types of users, students and professors. And we talk to them, we do interviews, and I was like, oh my gosh, user-centered, yes, right? And he was like, the students tell us what to do, we do it, and it's all great, it works, they use us, they're passionate, motivated, it's all good. With the professors, no, not that much. And I was like, wonderful, get me some professors on board, yeah? I need to talk to these professors and kind of try to understand them. And guess what, guys? It took him 2 weeks to call his professors and for them to call other professors together, 12 interviews together. But in this time, it was 2 weeks of lockdown already. So I had 12 interviews, actually, a professor in Wuhan. They weren't even allowed to go out. The whole state was blocked in China because it's where it started. Allegedly. And there was a professor in Spain, in Denmark. So out of US, we kind of tested all continents, or in Australia, I think. We tested all continents. I talked to people on all continents. And after 2 weeks of lockdown, these guys were pushing their kids away and were like, let me talk to some other person than my family. So these sessions were gold mine, I can tell you. And the method I chose to consolidate all this knowledge, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the customer journey map, user journey map. If you want to know more, guys, the Bible of experience mapping experiences, the book from Jim Colbeck, which I think is also the only one landscape version from O'Reilly, because guess what? It's full of maps and examples. It's really so inspiring, hence I call it a Bible. And it's full of images. Yeah, great books, full of images. I love them. So after the 12 interviews, very important, I slept the night over. And guys, after 12 interviews, you know it. After the 5th interview, you don't know anymore who said that, what, and people kind of melt into one or something similar, right? Excuse me. That's actually great effect, but take a night over so that your subconscious can even structure further the information. So I get up the next day, and I don't really like working with personas, guys. That's a whole different presentation. I call what I work with that consolidation of who is the person, that formed average person that we are working for or solving something for. I call them user profiles because pretty much what I write here is the common story between all these people of how they came to the context that we were researching. In our case, professors. How did they even become professors? Right? I'll stop popping in. How they even, their story. Yeah, a short story. Then I grasp their attitudes. You have very different attitudes from students and from professors, right? And that is important. And what you see here, the empty square, guys, these are the goals of these guys, the professors, but it's still empty, right? I don't know. I haven't analyzed all the data. So for now, it's still empty. You see here the 12 colors. Each interview has its own color. You see there is some journey, right? I ask them, how is it while you teach? What do you go through? And it's kind of a process. So I could depict it as a journey. But guys, I also ask them about similar topics. How do they get feedback to their work? When do they talk to other professors and ask them for advice? Because the problem was that students will give them ratings and kind of feedback, and the professors wouldn't care. because the students don't know anyway. They can't rate me. So I was trying to understand, where do you guys get rated? When do you get feedback? When do you feel insecure enough so that you actually are open for feedback to your work? What has to happen there for you to take that seriously? So you see, there were a few topics that didn't really fit in that process. So these are pretty much the mental models I picked for certain contexts. And then, guys, I always like the gray and the black I use for structure, and that's pretty much given through the interviews, right? I know what I asked them and what we went through super roughly as information. I put that down, you see rough squares, really, or like not squares, rectangles. And then between these 12 people, there were very common steps that pretty much everybody went through. So I use yellow always for behaviors or these outputs, if you wish, yeah, as a behaviorist would say. And then in the middle, I had images and some icons. These are the touch points. So this is all the tangible information, right? Everything the users say, we can see, others see it as well, we can touch, we can measure that explicit information. But as you guys learned already, I don't think with this psychology ends, right? There are these underlying structures. So pink I will use for pain points, and then green for the remaining thoughts, feelings, everything that goes here inside that sometimes people are not even aware of to be able to tell you about. And these were the common amongst the 12 interviews, but in the process of analyzing the data and actually extracting, you see here, interview by interview, I start extracting all data points, see how the structure is refined with the process, right? And through this extraction of data, I realized 2 of the cases are so outlier cases. They would do just an individual workshop once a year, so they wouldn't fit in that context that we were actually researching and targeting. So I ended up analyzing 10 of the interviews, 10 of the 12 interviews. And you see, guys, again, sleep a night over. And the next day I start looking at, okay, what is happening here and where is the truth between all these people? Yeah, all these 10 guys tell me something, but there are commonalities between them and there are also differences. So of course, with 10 interviews, guys, you can't put percentages behind it. You can't quantify it. It's too small of a number, but still, you see there are some darker, very good, you see them here on the red and green. There are some darker post-its because, hey, if 7 or more people said something out of 10, then we can be quite sure that this is the main case. But then there were interesting nuances, concerns, or whatever people will express or I'll catch between what they're saying between the lines that were actually edge cases, but still give us a very good understanding for the main case. So you see how there were like the solid post-its. This was like the story I was telling with going in depth into what is going in people's brains. But there were also the colleague of Paul Fesser. Fesser was the user profile persona, very creative, right? So there was the colleague of Paul, and then there was the brother of Paul to kind of demonstrate these nuanced cases that also have relevancy. And then this awful Violet eye stitching out Violet, guys. I always use for something that we should look at again because it pops out from the other colors. And these were advices or already solutions that the professors will give us along the way. So I didn't want to lose that information. So that's what you see here at the bottom. Now, what is that good for? The moment I was right, and guys, mind you, right, that was a time lapse. So it took roughly, when I have an interview recording of an hour, it will take 3 hours to extract the raw data. And I told you, this was after lockdown. So the interviews were rather 1.5, 2 hours. So it took me kind of a week to extract all the raw data and then 2-3 days to make all this consolidation, where in this time, I actually work 15, 18 hours and I only sleep 5 because I wake up and I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, but this guy said that here, but here he said something else. Let me listen to it again. There you've got the dilemma that people are not even aware of, or attention there, or yes, these things between the lines. So then after this week and a half, already end of March, beginning of April, I was like, guys, I'm ready. I need 2 appointments from you, 2 sessions, each 4 hours. And they were like, okay, we have here some stuff to release. 14th of April was the first session. I brought them in the mural, so I gave them, of course, a quick intro of the 2 we're gonna work in. I gave them some history. Here is the time lapse, guys, because I wanted them to see how much it's not just some gut feeling here or some thoughts that I come up with. No, it's systematic work that goes in here. I showed them, oh, I forgot to show you guys. You see that the goals at the end are there, right? I didn't know them before I started the co-analysis and consolidation. But then at the end, I was like, okay, this is what these guys are trying to achieve as professors in their lives, right? So this jobs to be done, keyword. So then I walk them really, you see how I'm talking, right? So I actually storytelled, I made a movie in their heads of who Poe is and what Poes go through. All the different Poes, what they actually professors, what they go through. And then I asked them to choose what is the stage, step, whatever. They were free to vote on the black post-its, which were structure, right? So steps. I was like, guys, where can you have the biggest impact now from everything you've heard? You know how these people think. You're in their shoes. Where do you think you as 4 people as a business have the biggest impact and can really solve problems for them? So they chose a certain stage. We formulated this as a challenge, and because I couldn't let them sleep a night over, I gave them a bit of a longer lunch break for them to be able to switch off the topic and then come back. I warmed up their brains and asked them to come up with solutions. First for themselves, a brain dump, and then really talk about them and build on each other, right? You know that, ideation, design, sprint, you know that. Then we clustered them into topics, solution topics, and we just started prioritizing them on a simple effort impact scale. All of you probably have heard of that as well. And our session was over. But remember, we had a follow-up. And guess what, guys? Everything that didn't make it into the final prioritization was the parking or a backlog. We had an additional challenge they could solve. We had plenty of ideas already clustered in topics that they could go about. In the second meeting, I reminded them again, guys, this was the process. This is how we came to that. These are professors, the users we are talking about. Stop it. And these are the moments of truth that you guys said will have the biggest impact. This was the cluster of ideas we had. Now let's go on continuing to think, how much is it going to cost you? And what impact do we expect from these ideas? 5 made it to kind of really the top 5 made it to a choice. I let them vote again. And one that you see here, the big yellow one, was an immediate to do, something that they could immediately fix. So we didn't even need to develop it as a concept, as an idea. But the remaining 4, I asked them, okay, take one of these sheets, you see here, 4 of them, and I want to know, guys, how does it work for the user? How does it work for you as a business? What are the concerns there? You see in red, and in yellow underneath, what exactly do we want to test to eliminate these concerns? Remember, going back to the confidence process, that's why I call it client confidence process. And because there were 4 people, right? The business owner, a front-end developer, a back-end developer, and a front-end designer, UI designer. While we talked, the front-end guy actually dropped a screen he's just quickly done together for one of the ideas where we saw pretty much the most potential into. So we actually, in the last hour, we started planning the user test that they're going to do. So this is the scenario for the user test based on that quick mock-up that we got while discussing the idea. You see, done quickly in 2 times 4 hours. And don't forget, they had a full backlog for like 2 years ahead, pretty much. And another challenge for the same session, but they didn't need me anymore. We have solved that problem of what is happening in professors' heads, that they wouldn't take that feedback that's so valuable. Actually, they wouldn't take it for full. Now, the second one I brought you guys is about perception and mental models. So a lot about this implicit stuff rather than behaviors. And it's a smart home client from Berlin whose business partner is the biggest electricity supplier in Berlin, Vattenfall. And we had already a previous effort with these guys, like 2-3 months before the project I'm going to tell you about. And I wanted to extract, they actually called me to understand their business partner. And I was like, well, guys, you have the experience with your business partner. Let's start extracting this knowledge you have in your heads. And we started putting it on an empathy map because I haven't talked to the business partner. I haven't researched them. There were some assumptions in there, right? It was still information to be validated. It wasn't a final user profile or persona, but still this taking out the information, making it explicit from their heads and sorting it already helped them that much that, as I mentioned, 2-3 months later, they called me and they were like, Martina, we got the business partner, the investor, yes. And now they said they're salespeople who go door to door, right? It was a smart home device around the fire detector with like all types of sensors for air quality, movement, and whatnot. And they said the business partner, their salespeople see an opportunity, my favorite word, if we make a remote for elderly people, because they don't all have a smartphone, we'll sell 10 times more. And I was like, luckily, these smart home guys from Berlin called me. I was like, well, let's go out and see what elderly people think about. So we went out with the co-founder, who is a marketing executive. I was like, I grabbed him under the arm and I was like, let's go out there. Elderly people on the street will find someone. So before noon, we found an elderly lady, invited her to a coffee shop, of course, had a wonderful conversation with her, a bit more than an hour, which actually, guys, gave us the structure for what came the afternoon. We had lunch, and then this guy says, well, Martina, in my district, there is a small mall, and the second floor of this mall is a coffee shop where all the it's the meeting point for elderly people. Guys, gold mine. I walked in, I was like, oh my gosh, who should we talk to first? And all these guys, elderly guys, they were so happy that someone wants to talk to them and understand them. So these were some of the sweetest interviews I've had. And guess what? You know already, right? So the next day we talked to another 5 people in the afternoon. So that was all in a day. Yeah. And the next day we gathered in the office, we debriefed what we learned. And guys, you know that I use red for problems. Well, violet and the dark blue were problems from business point of view. So you see, problems, it was like, forget it. They're gonna smash us. It's not gonna work. Yeah. But guess what? So it was a device for elderly people, and they sincerely hated it. They were telling us about other devices that they have destroyed because it's for elderly people. Or they would say, it's for the neighbor, not for me. Guess what? The neighbor is 81 and the guy we are talking to is 86. But no, it's not for them. It's for they're not there yet. Yeah, super cute. The defense was so sweet. But it kind of left us with, okay, what do we do? How do we tell the investor, listen, your idea sucks, right? It's not like it doesn't work like that. And guess what? These elderly guys had a Fitbit, a smartphone, a tablet. And I was like, these guys have more devices than I do. And I asked them, where do they get these old devices from? And guess what, guys? It turns out we are the channel for our elderly parents and elderly relatives to find to this new world of technology. Yeah, they said, my grown-up kids or the husband of my daughter. Yeah, we will be their channel to that. So, of course, we repivoted the research. We had already few clients, right, using the device. So we called a few existing clients, but also 5 new clients. And by the time we were recruiting them for research sessions, I made some market research because guess what? Germany is conservative in terms of technology, right? The biggest driver for digitalization was Corona. So in Germany, that was 2017, guys, you have to consider. And in 2017-18, when you said smart home, people were like, Alexa, it's recording me. They even, my cup for coffee, they were like, is this Alexa? Is it recording? And I was like, no, it's just, it's like, it's coffee. It's a thermos cup for coffee, you know? People were freaked out. So over 70% will say that smart home is the future, but around 20% will adopt smart home. So you see that huge gap. And again, guys, you know that process. We had these 8 interviews and I would start taking out data. Everybody had their own color. I also, because I didn't want to put people in emergency situations and test how they behave when there is fire in the home, right? Not so ethical to kind of create that situation for them. But guess what? There is a huge body of academic research that I also looked at in that time to understand what's the particularity in panic, in like fire. You can't come out, what's happening there in our heads and what are ultimately the behaviors. And because, guys, it wasn't about a process, but it was, as I said at the beginning, so much about perception of this new technology, right? This time I opted out not for a journey, but for a mental model diagram. If you want to know everything about mental models, your girl is Indy Young and her wonderful book, Mental Models. But also Jim, who I mentioned before, because, guys, these columns that you see in the mental model, which are kind of mindsets that people go through, not steps in a process, but like mindsets, these are pretty much jobs to be done. Yeah, the items in here. So the other book I would recommend here is the Jobs to be Done playbook, which is again from Jim, who's wrote also Mapping Experiences, my favorite book. And before too much advertising, the mental model, that was it. Yeah, that's a snippet of the whole map. But again, same process. I analyze in my dark room, smoke a lot, like really stereotypical that data analysis pretty much from last century. And then I called the client, and these guys were a 10 people company. Again, a small startup, but 10 people company, a bit more grown up than the previous. And with a big business partner and investor, right? And I called them and I was like, guys, I'm ready. I can't wait to show you what mindsets people go through and what goes in their heads. I walk them through the same way that you see me talking to you. So I make data come to life. Yeah, I tell really a story there that creates a movie in their heads, and inevitably they start feeling what people are going through. And it was about the grown-up child, our customers, people who already are interested in smart home. And then all together we met their touch points. So the ones that you see here at the beginning, the darker gray, these were the partners' touch points. Here they had a little touch point, but all the turquoise ones were like it's not super solid. It's there, a channel, but it's not super solid. The darker blue were the ones where they were the game, kind of, what is it called? They were the main channel there, the main communication, the main connection with customers or with users. And the pale gray, I hope you see them guys here towards the end, were actually new touch points that they wanted to create. Then you know that already as well. Once people hear problems, I let them come up with ideas how to solve them, right? So we went through the different stages. They started saying stuff because these are developers and product engineers, but like in the real sense, people making physical products. Partially, guys, I didn't even understand what they're talking about. I would just write it down and be like, is this correct? Python, whatever, integrate, right? Stuff that I don't even understand. And I was like, is this so correct? No, okay, let's go to the next solution. So you see, these were all the solutions that we gathered. And once my involvement with them was over, they started descoping some of the ideas, pulling the other ones. And these guys, the black bubbles, are their app screens from the existing app. And then don't ask me, API integrations, code, notifications, like stuff that I didn't really understand, right? And they started developing their solution. And I told you the map was a bit bigger. Yeah, I just showed you a snippet, so it's a bit clearer. The grown-up child, and then Helga was the name of our persona, the elderly lady who lives alone, autonomous, away from her family, not in a nursing home. And we included that case actually as a scenario. And you don't see here at the end, because I've cut the image, damn it. There is also a police and fire department. So actually they realized they need to go into partnerships with other companies to come to that, being able to serve this case that we were primarily really researching, elderly people living alone. Sorry. And then in late 2021, 2 years and something after the project we had, I look at the mural, guys, and I was like, wait, this was the map and this was their solution. What is this here at the bottom? Guess what? Remember, I went out doing the research with the co-founder who was a marketing executive. So what they have done 3 years, 2.5, 3 years later, they copied the mindsets that people go through. And based on that, they build their marketing strategy, right? And as if that wasn't a win enough for me, because I told you that's like when they start doing it right without me, that's a success. But as if that wasn't enough, guys, a year later, it was all over German media, the biggest newspapers, that a guy living in London managed to save the life of his mom, who was living alone close to Munich. So it actually saved a life, right? Not just one, but one that really went around the news. Now imagine, guys, we wouldn't have done that first step. We would have went with what the business partner wanted, yeah? Just to find out that people would love to smash that thing that we invested half or 1 million into, right? And that's it.